All right, Dr. Fred Steinmann with the University Center for Economic Development and the University College of Business is here today to talk about tourism improvement districts. Please welcome Dr. Fred Steinmann. Thank you, Fred.
Well, thank you, Bob, for having me today. It's my pleasure to talk about tourism improvement districts and the utilization of the accompanying sales tax anticipated revenue or STAR bond financing tool that city governments, county governments can utilize to finance a variety of economic development and community development efforts, really kind of targeting tourism-based development. Uh, as I switch screens here and go into my presentation, just to let everybody know, I currently serve as an assistant research professor in the College of Business here at the University of Nevada, Reno, and I work with Tom Harris, who's the director for the University Center for Economic Development. And our work really allows us the opportunity to engage with local cities, counties, various economic development authorities, and even the Nevada Governor's Office of Economic Development on a variety of economic development projects and initiatives. And in the world of community and specifically economic development, my first job in this business was as an intern with the City of Reno Redevelopment Agency. And my boss at the time, my real true first mentor in the world of economic development, very early on told me, he said, Fred, the ability to write a check in economic development is everything. And if you can't write a check, you can't really do anything. You can't acquire land, you can't do demolition and environmental remediation and abatement of contaminated soils or asbestos. You can't hire construction crews, and you can't build infrastructure, and you can't finance private development, especially in more expensive urban infill environments. And over the course of time, the legislature of the state of Nevada have realized the need to create specialized financing tools that local municipalities and counties in the state can utilize to finance specific community and economic development efforts. And tourism improvement districts, or TIDs, and sales tax anticipated revenue bonds, as outlined in Nevada Revised Statute 271A, is one of the newest tools that we have in our toolbox when it comes to financing and incentivizing economic development at a community level. A couple of things to kind of think about the Tourism Improvement District. In a lot of ways, the Tourism Improvement District, again, as outlined in NRS Chapter 271A, really mirrors, to a certain degree, the powers and authorities of a redevelopment district and a redevelopment agency as outlined in Nevada Revised Statute Chapter 279. I always think about the major difference between a redevelopment district or a tourism improvement district is the financing component and the focus. For a redevelopment district or a redevelopment agency, you're primarily using incremental property tax revenue that is going to be generated from a defined geographic area for the purpose of alleviating and mitigating blight while encouraging urban infill development. Tourism improvement districts essentially operate under the same basic financing philosophy in that incremental tax revenue is going to be the primary financing driver and tool that underlines a tourism improvement district. But as opposed to incremental property tax revenues to finance redevelopment activities, tourism improvement districts utilize incremental sales tax revenue or sales and use tax revenue. But the general process is the same for creation and establishment and utilization. And in the limited ways in which tourism improvement districts have been utilized, the end results of the tourism improvement district in Nevada have been very similar to the end results of redevelopment, in that we're trying to incentivize private development in a defined geographic area that has become obsolescent, has deteriorated, where there's not a lot of private investment occurring. Another big difference with the Tourism Improvement District is, again, the underlying reason as to why a city or a county might choose to create and utilize a tourism improvement district. And the very first authorizing law that created tourism improvement districts came in the 2003 session of the Nevada State Legislature under Nevada Senate Bill 495. And then one session later in 2005, Senate Bill 306 really created the meat of the authorizing legislation that would become NRS Chapter 271A in terms of how a tourism improvement district works. But the preamble of both those Senate bills makes it very clear what the focus is. It starts off by saying, whereas the state legislature recognizes the importance of economic development and tourism to the state of Nevada and the need to compete effectively with other states in the promotion of economic development and tourism. And secondarily, whereas it is the intention of the legislature for the provisions of this act to be carried out for the promotion of economic development and tourism in the state and for no other purposes. So even in the preamble, there's a little bit of a limitation. But reading this preamble, you know exactly what the purpose of a tourism improvement district is, and that is to support tourism-based development. And the background is important because it gives you an idea of when a tourism improvement district is appropriate to use. Again, 2003 was the first legislative session, the first year that we started to build this financing tool that local cities and counties in Nevada can utilize. This is coming off of the 9/11 terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11th in 2001 in New York, Washington, D.C., and of course, the plane crashing in Pennsylvania. The resulting recession, and it was a fairly short recession, but a fairly deep recession, really hammered the tourism and hospitality industry. As some of you may remember, there was a period of time where commercial flight, both domestically in the United States and foreign travel into and out of the United States, was suspended. There was a period of time where you could look at a radar map of US airspace and not see a single plane in the air. Needless to say, that had major economic impacts here in the state of Nevada, and specifically for Clark County, that even in 2003 and into 2001, really depends upon foreign travel as much as it depends upon domestic drive-in travel. So the legislature understood that, we didn't have a tool in the toolbox for local governments that were really focused on reviving tourism industries or related tourism industry sectors. This also, was starting to be considered even prior to the 9/11 terrorist attacks in response to the expansion and growth of hotel casino type 3 gaming outside the state of Nevada and outside the state of New Jersey. I mean, for the longest time, New Jersey and Nevada had monopolies on full-on type 3 style casino gaming in the United States. But beginning in the 1980s, with passage of the Indian Gaming and Regulatory Act, or IGRA, we started to see into the 1990s the spread of Class 3 or Type 3 casino style gaming throughout the United States. Last time I checked, there were over 30 states in the US that had similar gaming to what you would see on the Strip in Las Vegas or in downtown Reno or on the boardwalk in Atlantic City in New Jersey. And that obviously, put pressure and started to steal market share away from the essential monopoly that Nevada's gaming industry had, and to a lesser extent, the gaming industry in New Jersey. So the legislature, in response to the spread of Class 3, Type 3 casino gaming in the 1980s and 1990s, and in response to the 9/11 terrorist attacks and the subsequent economic recession and impacts on our state tourism economy, the legislature adopted SB 495 and then subsequently SB 306 to establish the Tourism Improvement District as a type of tax increment financing tool that cities and counties in Nevada could utilize to essentially revitalize their tourism and hospitality industry and to encourage its growth. Now, you're probably to a certain degree wondering, who cares, right? It's tourism and hospitality, and maybe we should be focusing our economic development dollars in other areas and in other emerging industry and occupation sectors that pay higher wages, that provide more stability and long-term employment. That's a valid point. And of course, the state of Nevada and cities and counties have done that, especially within the last decade since the Great Recession. But it's important to note that even today, prior to the COVID-19 related economic downturn, as of 2019, the arts, entertainment, and recreation and accommodation and food services industry, that's where your tourism and hospitality is going to be found, and the related retail trade industry sector still represent essentially the fundamental base of the state of Nevada's economy. So in 2019, there were a total of about 1.4 million people employed throughout the state. And I've just kept it to 2019 because 2020 has been a tough year in terms of COVID-19 and the global pandemic and its impact on the Nevada economy. So the numbers we would look at in 2020 would kind of be distorted as a result of that economic shock. So looking at 2019, it's a relatively normal year, as normal years go. So it kind of makes sense to look at this. And what I've done is I've listed total employment and the percentage of total employment for the top 5 industry sectors, or the largest industry sectors for the state of Nevada here. And you can see, arts, entertainment and recreation and accommodation and food services employed about 24 to 25%. Or provided 24 to 25% of the total jobs that exist statewide. And of course, in Clark County, that's going to be a higher percentage given the importance of the tourism and hospitality industry in Clark County. And as Clark County is our largest county, it drives a lot of our state's economic activity. So tourism and hospitality, don't kid yourself, is still a fundamentally important industry sector to the state economy. And the legislature recognizes this. And that's why tourism improvement districts have been created, especially as the tourism and hospitality sector here in Nevada is very susceptible to shocks like the 9/11 terrorist attacks and subsequent economic recession, the Great Recession as a result of the housing bubble bursting in the global financial crisis from 2008 to 2010. And certainly in 2020, we have seen just how susceptible tourism and hospitality is to something like a global pandemic, like the COVID-19 virus. And again, you can make the argument saying, well, we should be diversifying more. We should be investing in other industry and occupation sectors more that are less susceptible to those shocks. And I agree. And I think most elected and appointed officials at the state level and the local level in Nevada would agree as well. But you don't turn an economy the size of Nevada's around and in a different direction on a dime. It takes generations. If you're going to invest more in advanced manufacturing or warehousing and transportation, logistics and utilities, or the number 4 industry on this list, professional, scientific, and management and administrative and waste management services, it takes generations. You have to build a workforce. You have to encourage innovation and new business creation. And that takes a long time. And in the meantime, right, you still need to pay for all the things that are needed to support a growing population. And the property tax and the sales and use tax revenue, the gaming tax revenue that we generate from Nevada's tourism and hospitality industry is absolutely critical to support continued community and economic growth. So given the relative importance, 2019 employing about 340,000 total people statewide, tourism improvement districts are really designed to help support that industry so that it continues to generate value and jobs for individuals. Number 3 on the list, retail trade, and retail trade is very much tied to tourism and hospitality. Retail trade was number 3 on the list in 2019, employing about 164,000 people statewide. That's about 12% of total employment within the state. So a very important industry sector as well in terms of supporting. We know that when people go on vacation to Las Vegas or the Reno Sparks area or Tahoe or Elko or Ely, the number one thing they do is essentially shop. They engage in commercial retail activities. So we want to make sure that our retail trade sector is just as strong and robust as the arts, entertainment, recreation, accommodation, and food services. Again, in order to continue to encourage tourism and visitation to the state of Nevada and the supporting of that real primary industry sector. So as we kind of talk about tourism improvement districts and sales tax anticipated revenue bonds, try to keep in mind just how important these industry sectors are, arts, entertainment, et cetera, and the retail trade sector is to the state's overall economic performance. And of course, to the ability of cities and counties and the state to finance public services that all of us demand. Again, tourism improvement districts, like some of the other financing tools in the toolbox that exists, has been a fairly underutilized tool. And there's probably a couple of reasons for that. One is it's a relatively new tool. Again, it was first created back in 2003. It was built more in 2005. And in a couple sessions ago, there was some changes made to the authorizing statute, which has kind of limited the capabilities and the powers of tourism improvement districts. But I think it's just a general unfamiliarity with the tool that has limited its use. As best I can tell, based upon information that I was able to get from the Nevada Department of Taxation, there are 3 active tourism improvement districts in the state of Nevada. The very first one that was established and currently operates is the Legends at Sparks Marina. That's where Shields is located, and the IMAX Theater kind of surrounds, the old Helms Pit area that flooded due to one of the New Year's floods from a number of years ago, a number of decades ago almost. And the city of Sparks essentially has utilized the Tourism Improvement District statute and powers to revitalize, redevelopment, and transform that area into a new entertainment and shopping destination center in terms of the Legends project. Shortly after the establishment of the Legends project, the city of Reno established the Cabela's Boomtown Tourism Improvement District, where Cabela's and Boomtown are obviously located in the Verdi area, just off of US Interstate 80, kind of on the western edge of the city of Reno. That project was established in 2008, and the funds that were generated from the establishment of that tourism improvement district were used to partially finance the construction of Cabela's, the outdoor outfitter, as well as the major infrastructure that was needed, including the relocation of some of the assets and property that Boomtown Casino Resort operated at the time and currently operates as well. The most recent tourism improvement district that has been created is in the city of Las Vegas by the city of Las Vegas, and that's the Symphony Park Tourism Improvement District, established in 2015. That project is getting underway. I believe there's been some new development, but again, as a relatively new project, they're kind of in the process of building out the tourism improvement district, as opposed to the Legends project in Sparks and the Cabela's Boomtown project in Reno that are essentially built out at this point. And the establishment of the tourism improvement district and its current existence is really there to collect incremental property tax revenues generated by the retailers that are located at the Legends, and then primarily from Cabela's and the Cabela's Boomtown area, to retire debt that was issued 2006 for Sparks, 2008 for Reno, that was used to finance and incentivize new construction of the private sector side, but also to pay for major infrastructure that was needed to support those retail tourism-oriented development projects. So they're in the process of collecting revenues to retire debt, whereas Symphony Park Tourism Improvement District in the city of Las Vegas is still in the process of building out the district. But again, for Sparks, for Reno, and certainly for Las Vegas, tourism, hospitality, and retail are certainly major industry sectors. And each of these jurisdictions have gone through the process of determining that a tourism improvement district is the best fit. Given that the goal in each of these geographic areas is really to support and to drive new tourism in those defined geographic areas. Given the relative, small usage or limited usage of tourism improvement districts in the state, again, this is from the Nevada Department of Taxation's annual report. You can see that really the total amount collected across all of these three tourism improvement districts in terms of incremental sales tax revenue, they're significant numbers, but probably not as significant as you'd see if I were to add up all the incremental property tax revenue collected by the 15 existing redevelopment districts or the 88 or so special assessment districts. But it has been increasing over time. In fiscal year 2014-15, when again the Symphony Tourism Improvement District in the city of Las Vegas, was first created, about $13 million in total incremental sales tax revenue collected across the three TIDs, then up to about $20 million in 1920. And again, these revenues are being invested specifically back into the geographic areas that are defined as tourism improvement districts to support the infrastructure. And again, the idea is that as there's increased tourism and increased retail activity, primarily from people who live outside the state of Nevada, we can again localize the cost of that development and the infrastructure and the services and the programs and projects that the cities, at least in the case of Sparks, Reno, and Las Vegas, have to provide to support that new development. So it's a way in which we can essentially export the cost of these developments to people who live outside the state of Nevada, but may be incentivized to visit Nevada and spend some of their dollars in our state. Again, 271A of Nevada Revised Statutes outlines the creation process and the things that you can and cannot do. And again, not an attorney, not legal counsel. So if you are, as a city or county, considering establishing a tourism improvement district, always start by talking to your legal counsel, be it a city attorney, a district attorney, or private counsel that you've hired on retainer. I can begin to point you in the right direction, but again, I can't give you legal advice. So make sure to talk to legal counsel. Again, like any of these financing tools, it begins with the city council or the county commission essentially directing staff of their jurisdiction to begin the process of studying the feasibility and the economic feasibility of establishing a tourism improvement district. That's usually done, via resolution, telling staff to go get started. And then if you get to the point where you're actually going to create the thing, you do that by ordinance. And that usually includes, in fact, I'm pretty sure it requires some sort of statement within the ordinance that the purpose of the tourism improvement district is to attract visitors from outside the area where the TID is going to be located, from outside the state, to generate new taxable retail sales. And it is upon taxable retail sales that we generate sales and use tax revenue. And then again, in Chapter 271A, it outlines what portion of incremental sales tax revenue can be captured by the tourism improvement district to fund infrastructure and development, or to essentially bond off of in order to finance stuff moving into the future. The sales tax rate is a convoluted rate. And I don't have the time in a short presentation like this to dive into the weeds of it. But there are three components of the sales tax. There are actually more, but there are only three components of the sales tax rate that can actually be captured by a tourism improvement district. Up to 75% of the state tax rate, which is a 2% rate. So like in Washoe County, I think the sales tax rate is around 10%. So the state tax rate, taxable or sales and use tax revenue that would go to the state of Nevada out of that 10%, 75% of that can be captured by a tourism improvement district. Originally, 75% of the local school support tax rate of the overarching tax rate, sales tax rate, could be captured. Now I've bolded, italicized, and asterisked this because that changed a couple sessions ago in the Nevada State Legislature, where the local school support tax is now off limits to be captured by a tourism improvement district. But still remains is 75% of what is called the BSCCRT, or the Basic Supplemental City County Relief Tax. That's the portion of sales tax revenue generated within a county that is apportioned to a municipality and a county. And there's a god-awful equation and formula when it comes to determining how much goes to a city, how much goes to a county, like Washoe County versus Reno and Sparks, that I won't bore you with today. But needless to say, at least currently, of a dominant or prevailing sales and use tax rate of 10% in Washoe County, a tourism improvement district could essentially grab 4.25%, or 75% of 4.25% of those incremental sales tax revenues to finance and encourage tourism and retail related development within a tourism improvement district. As I mentioned, there's been some changes. In 2013, the state legislature decided to place some restrictions on how broadly tourism improvement districts could operate and be used. I won't get into the reasons why, but there was probably a little pushback by members of the public and elected officials on how tourism improvement districts had been used. So they decided to place some limitations and restrictions. The first thing they did was again say that local school support tax is exempted. So a tourism improvement district can't capture incremental sales tax revenues generated from a TID that would go to a school district like the Washoe County School District. So that limits the amount of revenue that you can generate. You also now have to pick one. Either you do a redevelopment district, as outlined in Nevada Revised Statute Chapter 279, or you get to do a tourism improvement district, again, as outlined in 271A, if you're a city or a county. And that was probably the result of, the public saying, at least in, the case of the city of Sparks and the Legends project and the city of Reno and the Cabela's Boomtown project, that you can't use both redevelopment and tourism improvement districts at the same time. And the Legends project in Sparks, that tourism improvement district is overlaid an existing redevelopment district for the city of Sparks. And for the Cabela's Boomtown tourism improvement district, that overlays an existing redevelopment district. So it allows the city of Reno and the city of Sparks to capture both incremental property tax revenues and incremental sales tax revenue. And the legislature essentially said, well, that's too much. We're not anti-economic development, but, double dipping, if you will, and capturing both incremental property tax revenue and incremental sales tax revenue, that's too much. So cities and counties essentially now moving forward have to pick. And that's probably, again, been one of the reasons why tourism improvement districts haven't been utilized as much as one would probably initially think they would be. There are 15 active redevelopment districts and agencies in the state of Nevada. And where you would likely establish a tourism improvement district, there's already an existing redevelopment district. So cities and counties have essentially said, well, there's no point in establishing a TID because a redevelopment district already exists. We'll see if that changes over time as some of these redevelopment districts may expire, whether or not cities and counties want to utilize tourism improvement districts more moving forward. And then there were also some additional revisions made in 2013 Senate Bill 406 that essentially required any contractors or subcontractors operating within a tourism district to be paid prevailing wages. And that kind of increases the cost of new development. We can go back and forth and debate whether or not that's justified. That debate is moot because the legislature has made the decision in saying that if you're going to establish a tourism improvement district and new construction is going to occur, those construction workers from the top down to the bottom all need to be paid prevailing wages. And that can make the cost of new development a little higher than what the market could potentially bear. But those are limiting factors that we have to think about as well. Again, I've already touched upon the general process in terms of establishing a tourism improvement district. What's unique about the creation process of a tourism improvement district as outlined in NRS Chapter 271A is that you have to get permission if you're a city or a county by both the governor of the state of Nevada as well as the Nevada Commission on Tourism to create that tourism improvement district. And you don't need permission by anybody. If you're a city or a county, if you want to create a redevelopment district, if you want to create a special assessment district, if you want to create a general improvement district, or if you want to create something like a tax increment area, you're the elected body at the local level as the city council or the county commission. So you can do whatever you want as long as you conform to the law, within those applicable statutes. But if you want to create a redevelopment district, if you're a municipality, it's your decision and your decision alone. Same thing for GIDs, SADs, tax increment areas, and a few other tools. That is not the case with tourism improvement districts. Before the governing body, city council or county commission, establishes and starts utilizing a tourism improvement district, you do need the approval from the governor of the state of Nevada, and you do need the approval from the Nevada Commission on Tourism. And failure to get both entities approval means that you cannot establish a tourism improvement district regardless of what you want to do at the local level. And there's a number of reasons for that. Probably the top of that list is the state of Nevada is essentially going to lose some incremental sales and use tax revenue, so they want to say in the process. And also they want to make sure that the tourism improvement district aligns with the state plans when it comes to enhancing and supporting tourism and hospitality development in the state. And needless to say, the Nevada Commission on Tourism, as part of the Nevada Department of Tourism and Cultural Affairs and working with the Nevada Governor's Office of Economic Development, they want to say. And given that they're the state and they write the law, they have written into the law that they are going to have a say. The governing body also has to notify other impacted jurisdictions, like if there's another city, or if you're a city, you need to notify your county, the local school district, although they're not impacted anymore, although you still have to notify them. It's kind of a quirkiness in the state law, but you have to notify those other jurisdictions that may or may not be impacted by the establishment of the tourism improvement district and the loss of potential incremental sales and use tax revenue. Those other jurisdictions don't get a say, but they get to comment. So I would imagine that whoever the governor of the state of Nevada is at any given time, as well as members of the Nevada Commission on Tourism, are probably going to listen to what those other impacted jurisdictions are saying. And they're going to take that into account in establishing that tourism improvement district. So it really does behoove the jurisdiction interested in pursuing a tourism improvement district to work with other impacted jurisdictions to make sure that this is a good fit. And that some of the concerns of the other jurisdictions are addressed and responded to in an appropriate manner. Because ultimately, we want to make sure that the end result of the utilization of a tourism improvement district is going to serve the interests of the entire community and improve and increase tourism and additional gaming tax revenue and future sales and use tax revenue and property tax revenue and business license revenue. that all the jurisdictions can benefit from. But again, that's a collaborative process that should be engaged in very early on in the development of that tourism improvement district. There are, a number of conditions that must be met for the governor of the state of Nevada and the Nevada Commission on Tourism to sign off on, as well as findings that have to be made by the local jurisdiction, city or county, when it comes to forming and utilizing the TID itself. First and foremost is the finding of a positive financial impact, in that in both the short term and the long term, the tourism improvement district is not going to impede the ability of local government. And that includes other impacted jurisdictions, county, cities, school district, and even the state, from providing public services that are necessary to support the development moving forward. You also have to make a determination that you're going to see a significant increase in the sales and use tax revenue generated from retailers who will populate the tourism improvement district over time. And underneath that is the condition that retailers that are going to come into the tourism improvement district are new to the area, in that they do not have an existing location operating within the jurisdiction, not necessarily within the tourism improvement district, but again, for the entire jurisdiction. So again, the Cabela's Boomtown area was eligible and met this criteria because Cabela's did not have an existing location anywhere within the city of Reno. So it was a new retailer in a tourism-oriented industry sector, because the Cabela's draws a lot of visitors from California and even other states. So it met that criteria. And you also cannot have any existing retailers within the existing or proposed tourism improvement district at the time of its establishment. And again, the whole rationale of that is that we should be helping create new retailers and new tourism opportunities. We shouldn't just be subsidizing existing retailers that are already there. And then finally is the finding again that a preponderance, and how you define preponderance is tricky because it's not defined in state law, but it has generally become understood to be, 50% plus one, so a majority of the increase in sales and use tax revenues from that tourism district will be attributable to tourists who are not residents of the state of Nevada, not necessarily of the city or the county or the area that the TID is going to be located in, but from outside the state of Nevada. And there are some reporting requirements with the Department of Taxation and the Department of Tourism and Cultural Affairs, and even the Governor's Office of Economic Development that you have to follow on an annual basis in order to make sure that you are meeting that requirement, that a preponderance or majority of whatever new sales and use tax revenue that is generated from the tax increment district is really coming out of the pockets of visitors, tourists who live outside the state of Nevada. Because again, going back to that preamble, it's all about trying to increase tourism in the state of Nevada. And given the importance of retail as a supporting sector to tourism and hospitality, this tends to work if done well and if done properly. I've listed, just to kind of wrap this up, some of the powers of a tourism improvement district. Again, in a lot of ways, they very much mirror some of the powers that a redevelopment agency under NRS Chapter 279 has. You can issue bonds and use anticipated sales tax revenue under what is called a STAR bond, sales tax anticipated revenue, STAR bond, to essentially capture future incremental sales and use tax revenue to pay for improvements and development today, and then use those incremental revenues to retire debt moving forward. Like a redevelopment agency, you can partner with other governmental agencies, federal, state, local, whoever, to pursue joint projects, to leverage resources, to finance the cost of borrowing, and of course, the opportunity to use the STAR bond revenues, you would generate from the sale of STAR bonds to fund, those supportive retail-based tourism. in areas that are an established tourism improvement district, but would benefit from that 1-2 punch, if you will, of tourism, hospitality, recreation, and retail at the same time. And again, given that we know that the number one activity people typically do when they go on vacation is shop, they utilize retailers. It makes sense to have that 1-2 punch authorized within the tourism improvement district legislation. So that's tourism improvement districts and the utilization of sales tax anticipated revenue bonds at kind of a high level. Again, the statute 271A that kind of governs TIDs and star bonds is rather lengthy, but hopefully this gives you a general idea of how this can be used to support community and economic development in general, but more specifically, tourism, hospitality, and retail development moving forward. So thank you very much for having me today.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. That was fascinating. I have a similar question as to the last one that we did. Is reading the tea leaves, what do you envision for the future of tourism improvement districts in Nevada at this point? I mean, you mentioned the different layers of approval that are needed at the state level, particularly with respect to the Commission on Tourism, and then I believe you said the governor's office has to sign off on it.
The governor himself or herself, depending on who's sitting in that chair. But yeah, the governor specifically has to sign off on it.
Yeah. So what's the likelihood of us seeing more of these in Nevada?
So here we are on March 24th, 2021, and we as a state are continuing to deal with the ongoing impacts of the COVID-19 global pandemic. And we're seeing, really the impact that it has had on Nevada's tourism and hospitality and retail sectors. I have been looking at monthly unemployment rates for the state of Nevada, Washoe versus Clark. The high unemployment rate in Washoe County in April of 2020 was just over 20%. In Clark County, it was almost 34%. Those numbers have come down. As of December 2020, the unemployment rate in Washoe County was 5%. It was 11.2% in Clark County, and statewide was about 8.1%. But one thing we've certainly seen is, again, the vulnerability of tourism, hospitality, and retail to an economic shock like the COVID-19 global pandemic. And as a result of that, I think that there's probably some renewed interest by certain cities and counties throughout the state about utilizing the powers in NRS Chapter 271A, the Tourism Improvement District stuff, to get retail and tourism and hospitality back on its feet. In the era of a global pandemic where the borders between Canada and the United States is closed to non-essential travel, when there's restrictions on travel from Southeast Asia and Eastern and Western European markets, this is probably a good time for cities and counties to re-examine the potential usage of tourism improvement districts and star bonds to get tourism and retail back up on its feet. Certainly in the world of small business development, a lot of small businesses are retailers. And this could be a way and a vehicle to essentially reinvigorate small business creation within the state, as long as it conforms, right, to those requirements that you be within a defined geographic area, that the major focus is on tourism and hospitality. But I think that the current climate that we are in early 2021 is probably creating some renewed interest. Whether or not that will result in new districts being created, you can never predict the future. I also think that as some of our older redevelopment districts in the state start to expire, the downtown redevelopment district in Sparks along Victoria Ave, the downtown Reno redevelopment district, kind of that Virginia 4th Street, 1st Street area. Once those older redevelopment districts expire, because there is a definitive time frame, you can't have those districts existing forever. They have to expire at one point. And then there's like a 50 to 100 year moratorium on creating a new redevelopment district over the expiring one. cities like Reno and Sparks may look at tourism improvement districts as a way to continue the efforts to revitalize the tourism, hospitality, and retail sectors in those urban cores. And I know there's been a little bit of talk about that, but again, you'd have to wait for those redevelopment districts to actually expire before you could create a new TID. So I think we have a little bit of time. I think that as jurisdictions become a little more familiar with tourism improvement districts, again, it's a relatively new tool in the toolbox. You may see additional use of this tool, especially if tourism, hospitality, and retail remain essential, base components of the Nevada economy as a whole.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Fred. That was very enlightening and really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.